Okay, so we've been talking about decimal fraction conversions, being able to convert fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. So you have a flip book at home that is, most of them are yellow, some of them are white. And the first thing that we looked at is the fraction 1/2. Okay, so for 1/2, if we're wanting to convert that to a decimal, we cannot convert it to a decimal as is. The reason why is because if you look at our place value chart, we have our decimal here, our whole numbers, you know, the ones place, tens place, all of our whole numbers are off to the left, but off to the right are our decimals. These are not whole numbers, they're part of. They are called tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and they will go on and on, but these are the three main ones that we work with. So you have to think, when you have a fraction of 1/2, like we do here, well, where are we supposed to put that on our number line? We can't. There is nothing that is called halves. So we have to be able to get to a tenth, hundredth, or thousandth so that our fraction will read the same as our decimal, and that way we can convert it into a decimal. So how do we do that? There are a couple of different ways we could. I'm going to open this up, and inside I'm going to start with my 1/2. Now, many of you said you did E-charts or EFTs. So let's do an EFT, that's equivalent fraction table, where we basically are making a chart of fractions that all equal 1/2. And all we're doing is skip counting. Let me zoom this in just a little bit so you can see it better. So we're just skip counting on the top by ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the bottom by twos, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Well, we don't have a place value called fourths, we don't have a place value called sixths, eighths, but we do have one that is named tenths. It's the one to the very far right of the decimal, tenths place. So I could not make 1/2 a decimal as is, but now that I have converted it to 5/10, which is the same as 1/2, I could convert it into a decimal because I can put that 5 right into the tenths place. 5/10, 5/10, they sound the exact same. Now, I said there was a couple of ways of getting to the 5/10. You could do an EFT. For going from 2 to 10, it's easy. It's not that time consuming. But if we had a larger number, it would be time consuming, like if we had to get from 2 to 100. So another option is just to multiply. You know that you have to get to a 10, 100, or 1,000. So multiply to get there faster. Well, what times 2 gives you 10? That would be 2 times 5. And whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So that would give you 5/10. And that's just a lot faster, especially if you're using bigger numbers. Okay, so let's look at another fraction, 1/4. So if you're talking about 1/4, of course we don't have a place value that's named fourths. We have tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So fourth is not going to work. If I were to do an E-chart or an EFT, 4, 8, 12, I couldn't get into 10. So what's the next option? Next option is a 100. Well, that's what I'm talking about. That is a long EFT or an E-chart. So we think about the fourths like money, because it takes 4 quarters to get to 100. So it would take 4 quarters to get to $1. So that way we can remember easily that if we have a fourth, whether it's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, that we can take 4 times 25, because we know 25s are quarters, and I'll get 100. And I know whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top, so I'd get 25 hundredths. Now, because it shares a name, remember with our place value, tenths, hundredths, it shares the name with the hundredths place. I can convert this to a decimal, and it would be decimal 25, because the 5 is in the hundredths place. Okay, so what about 2/4? 2/4 we're going to skip because 2/4 and 1/2 are the same thing, and we've already done 1/2 would be 5/10. So let's do 3/4. Well, same idea. You're not going to get to a 10 with a 4. It's not going to go in evenly, so we're going to have to get to 100. Think of it like quarters. If I multiply it by 25, I know that 4 quarters make $1. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I get 75 hundredths. And now, because it says the same thing as a decimal, I can put it right into the decimal place value. It's 75 hundredths. Okay, then we're going to move to fifths. So 1/5. Well, again, if you look at your place value, there's nothing called fifths. So I have to get to a tenth, hundredth, or a thousandth. Well, 5 is super close to 10. I could do an E-chart for this one. I could also just multiply. What times 5 gets me to 2? That's going to be, I'm sorry, to 10. I gave away the answer. It'd be 5 times 2. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. 2/10. Now it sounds like a decimal, so I can just put it right into my decimal place value. 2/10, 2/10. They sound identical. Okay, why don't you try 2/5. Pause the video, try it on your own, and come back and check. Okay, so you should have tried 2/5 on your own. What you should have remembered is that you've got to get to a tenth, hundredth, or thousandth. And since 5 is so close to 10, that's the easiest thing to do. 5 times 2 gets me to 10, and whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I would have 4/10. How do I write that in a decimal? 4/10. Now I don't have to put a 0 there, it just looks pretty. It's a placeholder, because that's usually the ones place right there, but that's up to you. You can just put decimal 4 if you'd like also. Let's do, how about 3/5? Pause the video, try that one on your own, and then come back and check. Okay, so you should have tried 3/5 on your own. Same thing we've been doing. 3/5, I have to get to a 10, 100, or 1,000. I know that 5 times 2 gives me 10, and I know that whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I have 6/10. I can just write it in my decimal. 6/10. 6/10. They sound identical. So then we went to our flip chart, and we've got tenths. I think they started with 1/10. Well, remember when we first started, we looked at our place value and said, okay, our fraction has to say the same thing as our place value for decimals in order to convert them over. Well, if my fraction is 1/10, that is already sounding like my place value for decimals. So I don't even have to do anything here to convert 1/10. 1/10 in a fraction and 1/10 in a decimal sound the exact same. So there's no converting here that I have to do. What about 3/10? Again, 10th is already there, so all I have to do is convert 3/10. There's no work to those at all. They're already in a form that I can convert. But then we jump down to the bottom. And this is where we ran into our eighths. Okay, an eighth, obviously we don't have that on our place value. We're not going to get an even number of eighths into 10, so we're not going to be able to do an EFT and get 10. We're not going to be able to do an EFT or multiply to get 100, but we can get to 1,000. And there's a couple ways of doing that. Either you just know you have to multiply by 125, and whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top, over 1,000. And then you write it as a decimal. 125 thousandths. Okay, but the hard part that we had in class is nobody knew that 8 times 125 is 1,000 without doing a lot of work. So what we talked about is taking the 1/8 and dividing up. And I'm going to switch papers so we can see that. Okay, so we took 1/8 and we're going to divide up, meaning the 8 is going to be on the outside of our house, the 1 on the in. Well, the first thing you guys would tell me is I cannot divide 1 8 times. No, you can't, as a whole number. However, we can make this into a decimal, because remember, decimal is part of a number, and then we can expand it out. So the key is I have to write my decimal, because if I don't, I'm saying that I can divide 1 whole up into 8 whole pieces, and that's not true. So the key is you've got to make sure your decimal's there. And then we're just going to expand out our number. Notice I've added a 0, but I have not changed the value at all. It is still a 1 whole. Now, how many times does 8 go into 10? Once. 1 times 8, 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. I'm going to add another 0. Now it's starting to look like money. It looks like $1. I still have not changed the value. I still have 1 whole. I'm going to bring this 0 down. How many 8's go into 20? That's 2. 2 times 8 is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. And I'm noticing my numbers keep changing. So my answer is going to keep changing. And so I'm going to keep adding zeros. And all I'm doing when I'm adding zeros is expanding out my whole number so that I can break it up into as many pieces as I can. Okay, how many 8's go into 40? That's 5. 5 times 8 is 40. I'm at a 0. When I'm at a 0, it means this is my answer, and I'm done. So 1/8 is equal to decimal 125, or 125 thousandths. Well, if you notice back on our flip chart, we already got that. So if we knew ahead of time we could multiply by 125, great. But most of us do not know that, so we could do the division to find out the exact decimal. So let's try that for, let's see, 2/8 is the same as 1/4. We've already done that. So let's do 3/8. 3/8 does not have an equivalent on our flip chart. So let's do 3/8. I want you to pause the video. I want you to try to divide it up and see how you do. Okay, you should have tried this on your own. 3/8 and divide it. So remember, that means that 8 is on the outside, 3 is on the inside, which at first does not look right, because you know you cannot divide 3 wholes up 8 different times. But we're going to expand our whole number so that we can break it up into pieces. So I'm going to add a 0. How many times does 8 go into 30? Goes in 3 times. 3 times 8 is 24. Bring down your 6. I'm going to add another 0. Now it's looking like $3. I'm trying to break it up into change. How many times does 8 go into 60? It's going to be 7 times for 56. 60 minus 56 is 4. My numbers keep changing, so I'm going to keep adding zeros and keep expanding that number out as far as I can. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. And we're left with 0. When we're left with 0, that means we have our answer. So 3/8 is the same as 375 thousandths. It converts to our decimal. So let me write that information in here. Our 3/8 is 375 thousandths. Okay, what about, let's see, 4/8 is the same as 1/2, so we won't write that. Let's do another one, 5/8. pause the video and try it on your own again. Okay, you should have come back to check. You should have tried this one on your own. 5/8. Divide up, which simply means 8 outside of the house, 5 inside. Now we know we cannot divide 5 whole pieces up into 8, but we are going to expand our number so we can see the pieces. 8 goes into 50 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. We get a 2. I'm going to add another 0 to expand it out even more. That goes in twice. 2 times 8 is 16. Bring down our 4. My numbers are still changing, so I'm going to expand it out again. Bring down my 0. 8 goes into 40. 5 times 8 is 40, so I'm left with a 0. So I know that 5/8 is equivalent to 625 thousandths. Transfer that into my flip book. So in our flip book, we know how to convert halves easily. Fourths, we're going to think of money. Fifths is just times 2, or to double it. Tenths are already there for us. So all we need to memorize is our eighths. And we want to memorize those because even though we can do this, and we should be able to do this, we're not going to be able to divide on our time tests. So there's 4 that you really need to master and to memorize for your time tests. The rest you should be able to do easily because of your little tricks that you've got.